Thank you for that, Vashi. We'll talk to both of you after this. Now, the Prime Minister of Canada.
At 2 p.m. Atlantic time, we will observe a minute of silence in honour of Constable Heidi Stevenson and all the victims of the Nova Scotia shooting. I also want to remind everyone that at 7 p.m. Atlantic or 6 p.m. Eastern, a virtual vigil will be held to remember those who were taken from us too soon and support their friends and family during this particularly difficult time. I hope that many of you will join us and wear red today in a show of solidarity. Let's come together to support these communities who suffered immeasurable loss. Let's celebrate the lives of those who left us too soon. Let us remember the families, friends, loved ones whose absence will linger for years and lives. You can find more information at novascotiaremembers.com. La semaine qui se termine a été particulièrement.
This past week has been particularly painful and heartbreaking for all Canadians and the people of Nova Scotia. At 2 p.m. today, we will observe 1 minute of silence to remember Constable Heidi Stevenson and other victims of the shooting in Nova Scotia. At 7 p.m., there will be a virtual vigil at 6 p.m. Atlantic time, at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. This will be an opportunity for us to show the families and friends of the victims that we are there to support them. I do hope that many of you will join us and will wear red as a sign of solidarity. For more information, you can consult the site novascotiaremembers.com.
Has been working with its provincial and territorial partners not only to get through this crisis, but to position our economy to rebound once it's over. And a big part of this work means listening to the concerns of Canadians and making adjustments as we go along. One thing we've heard is that small businesses are having trouble making rent because of COVID-19. If you've had to close up shop because of public health recommendations, if you don't have a lot of money coming in because people aren't spending as much these days, you may be worried about losing your office space or not having a coffee shop to reopen after this crisis. So last week, we said that we're planning on introducing the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance. And today, I can announce that we've reached agreements with all provinces and territories to lower rent by 75% for small businesses that have been strongly affected by COVID-19 for April, May, and June. The government will cover 50% of that reduction, with the property owner covering the rest. If you are a small business that has been strongly affected by COVID-19 and you're paying less than $50,000 per month on rent, you'll be eligible to receive this support. It will also be there for nonprofits and charitable organizations that are struggling right now. We'll also have more to say in the coming days about rent support for larger businesses.
Last week, I announced our intention of introducing the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program, and today I'm able to confirm that we have reached agreements with all the provinces and territories to lower rent by 75% for small and medium-sized businesses that have been hard hit by COVID-19 for the months of April, May, and June. The government will cover 50% of that reduction, whereas the owner will cover the rest. This support will be available to small businesses that have been hard hit by COVID-19 and whose monthly rent is less than $50,000. Charities and non-profit organizations will also be eligible under the program. And very soon, we will have other news for larger corporations. Later today, I will be talking to the premiers of the provinces and territories, and we have a number of items on the agenda. For one thing, we will be continuing our conversation on the gradual reopening of the economy. Canada is a huge country, and it's clear that the pandemic has not hit each region the same way. We are a federation. That means that we have to adjust our response to the realities in each province and territory. But reopening the economy, whatever province or territory is concerned will have to happen gradually to ensure that the progress that has been achieved will not be lost. There must be significant coordination at the national level. So we will be working with the provincial and territorial governments to establish principles and recommendations that will ensure the safety of Canadians. But I want to be quite clear when it comes to reopening the economy. That will not happen overnight. It has to be done one step at a time. If you do not want us to start from scratch, every single person must continue to be vigilant and to follow public health recommendations. From the beginning of this crisis, we have been seeing what has been happening in Singapore and Japan and South Korea. And in some places, we have seen the challenges associated with reopening the economy. So we must be very, very careful. Every place may have a separate approach. So if you see that one province is going to relax its rules, you must still continue to follow the rules in place where you live. Otherwise, there's a real risk that we will lose everything that we've done thus far. As I said yesterday, we are witnessing troubling scenes in seniors' homes and long-term care facilities right across this country. That is unacceptable, and our government will be there to help. Members of the Canadian Armed Forces will be deployed following an official request from Ontario and Quebec, and the Minister of Public Safety has accepted those requests. The reconnaissance work is underway in those two provinces, and we are now identifying the work to be done and the next steps. Ontarians and Quebecers and all Canadians can count on us in this crisis. We are deploying the Army to provide urgent assistance and help the provinces to take control of the situation. And we know that that's not a long-term solution. We have also given millions of dollars to the provinces to beef up salaries so that our seniors receive the care that they need and deserve.
What we're witnessing in long-term care facilities across the country is extremely troubling. It's unacceptable, and our government will be there to help the provinces. Members of the Canadian Armed Forces will be deployed after the Minister of Public Safety received and approved two formal requests from Ontario and Quebec. Reconnaissance work is underway in both provinces. We're identifying what needs to be done and mapping out next steps. As I've said many times before, we will be there for Quebecers, Ontarians, and all Canadians during this crisis. We're deploying the military to provide emergency support to help provinces regain control of the situation. But we all know that this is only a short-term solution. We're also offering billions of dollars to provinces to top up the pay of essential workers and make sure that elderly Canadians get the support they deserve. Later today, I'll be meeting with the First Ministers to continue our work on supporting Canadians during this time. We're also going to talk about reopening parts of the economy. Canada is a vast country, and some regions have been hit harder than others during this pandemic. We're a federation, so we have to adapt our response to the realities and challenges of each province and territory. But I want to be clear that getting back to normal will not happen overnight. It's going to take time. It won't be as simple or as easy as flipping a switch. It'll require a lot of coordination at the national level, and our government will be there to do that work. We will be working with the provinces and territories to establish principles and guidelines to start reopening the economy safely. Over the coming weeks, you'll hear more talk about reopening, but you need to know we're not out of the woods. It's absolutely critical that everyone continues to follow local public health instructions as we move forward. For now, these instructions are the same for all Canadians. No matter where you live, you should be staying home as much as you possibly can. You should be washing your hands regularly, and you should always keep a safe distance of 2 meters from others. That is the only way for us to make it through together. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions au téléphone aujourd'hui. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. Première question, Michel Lamarche, TVA Nouvelles, à vous.
Good morning. First of all, I'd like you to comment on this commercial rent program. There are some business owners that they had to shut down their boutiques or their restaurants. Can you tell us when will that money be delivered to them? And don't you think you should have acted on this earlier? Well, we know that this is an extremely difficult crisis and that small businesses have been hit hard by this, including restaurants and other businesses that have had to shut down completely because of COVID-19. That's why we recognize that even with the wage subsidy, fixed costs for these businesses are a real challenge. That's why we will be covering 75% of their rent for April, May, and June, and we'll see afterwards what's necessary for those businesses that are hardest hit by COVID-19. Now, we have already introduced a program of access to credit for businesses. They can receive up to $40,000 to help them to pay their costs in the interim, and the money to pay their rent will be getting to them as soon as possible, and that will help them in April. A follow-up? Yes, as a follow-up, Mr. Trudeau, I'd like to have you comment on long-term care facilities in Quebec. Some have the sense that you were dictating to the provinces or lecturing them. And the Premier has been saying it's a simple solution. It's been known for a long time. The government has to increase its transfers to the provinces. And so now, will you do that? Well, I can tell you that all Canadians are asking questions about what is happening in seniors' homes and long-term care homes. This is the type of reflection that we all have to engage in, and all levels of government as well, as to what we should have done and also what we must do in the coming months and years. The fact is that we will be part of those conversations because the federal government must be part of the solution, and we will be part of those discussions when they happen. But right now, our emphasis is getting through this crisis and helping the provinces to regain control of the situation. We will be there to support Canadians. We will be there to support our seniors in trouble these days.
Obviously, all Canadians are asking themselves questions about this situation that has allowed so many of our elders to be so incredibly vulnerable to COVID-19 and related issues. We need to do better, and we will be working with the provinces on ways to move forward. We will, of course, be there to have conversations about increasing supports to the provinces for health care. We've seen significant needs on health care across the country. We will have those conversations in the future. Right now, our focus is on making sure we're giving all the help we need during this crisis to the provinces and specifically to Canadians right across the country.
Merci. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Catherine Lévesque, La Presse canadienne. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I just want to come back to rent. I'd like to know what will the provinces, what percentage they will be covering, where the money will come from, and in what proportions, and how this will really work. Well, for businesses that are paying $50,000 in rent or less that have been hard hit by COVID-19, we will allow them to pay only 25% of their rent in April, May, and June. Of the 75% that they will not be paying, the landlord will absorb 25%, and the federal government and the provinces will absorb the other 50%. The proportion between the provinces and the government is 75% for the federal government and 25% for the provinces. But you will receive more details about this announcement in the following hour. A follow-up, Catherine? Now, with respect to the top-up payments for essential workers, you are giving billions of dollars to the province, and we know that this was on the agenda of your discussion with the premiers of the provinces and territories last week. Have you reached an agreement with them? And if not, where's the logjam? Yes, we've made a lot of progress in our discussions with the premiers last week. Obviously, the different provinces have different circumstances. There is a certain reality in Ontario and Quebec. Quebec has already taken action. British Columbia has already taken action as well in its own way. And we will be there to support them in what they're doing and perhaps add on to that. But other provinces are not facing as much of an intensity in terms of the pandemic. So we're not totally certain how, or they're not certain how they want that aid to come. And in the coming days, we will be talking to see what makes sense for everyone. But we are there to help and to ensure that our essential workers have the necessary support to continue to do their work.
We have been working over the past week with provinces on topping up the pay for essential workers, particularly those in long-term care facilities. We recognize that they are doing particularly important, they're always particularly important jobs, but they're particularly difficult and complex circumstances right now. But all provinces are in slightly different situations. So a number of provinces want to move forward very quickly. Others had a few questions about how it would apply in their province where the pandemic is hitting less hard, where budgetary constraints are different and choices are different. We are getting very close to having an agreement with all the provinces, and we should be able to move forward soon.
Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Laura Osmond, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. I wanted to ask you about the cost-sharing agreement with the provinces for the rent subsidies. Are they sort of set in stone at this point? Are they still being negotiated? And if so, are different provinces making their own deal with the federal government, or will it be consistent across the board?
Those are questions better suited for the more technical briefing a little bit later, but I can tell you that we have worked out this agreement with the provinces, and the program as it is right now is how it is going to unfold.
On follow-up?
Thank you. Some businesses are saying they have no revenue. They can't cover that 25%. And now that they've shut their doors, they don't think they're going to be able to reopen them unless they get full support. Is there more help coming for them? What do you say to those businesses?
This is an extremely difficult situation for Canadians, for businesses right across the country. We recognize that COVID-19 is hitting some people harder than others, some areas harder than others. And unfortunately, this is something that we are grappling with. We are trying to help as many people as possible. The businesses that have no revenue and are unable to make even the 25% rent, well, they still have access to that $10,000 of forgivable loans with a total of $40,000 available from the banks. That $10,000 actually represents an average month's rent for a small business in this country, which means a quarter of that can actually last for 4 months. This is aid that we've given to small businesses, made available without them having to indebt themselves further, to try and ensure that we get through this with as many of the small businesses that are the motors of our economy, the principal employers across the country, get through this difficult time and come back strong afterwards.
Merci. Opérateur, dernière question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Adam Uris, New Brunswick Telegraph. Line open.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for taking my question. New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs says several of the province's employers are struggling to get employees to agree to return to work, suggesting it's a repercussion of the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Are there concerns that Canadians may instead want to stay home and collect benefits and not return to work? And was this thought of when the plan rolled out?
We are facing one of the largest health crises, the largest economic crisis of our lifetime, and Canadians need help. They need help paying their rent. They need help buying groceries. They need help caring for their loved ones. They've lost their paychecks. They've seen themselves very, very anxious about their own health, about their parents' health, about their future. We needed to help Canadians, and we did exactly that. Helping Canadians right across the country get through this pandemic is not just about generosity, it's about making sure that we are able to do the things necessary in every home across the country to be able to keep this country safe and to make sure we have an economy that can rebuild quickly afterwards. This government will help Canadians who need help. Period. Okay.
We are currently experiencing an unprecedented situation, a very serious situation, a public health crisis, an economic crisis as well. And Canadians right across the country need support. They need help to pay their rent. They need help to buy groceries or to look after their children or grandparents. We are in a situation now where we must help people so that they can make the right decisions and stay home and wait until this crisis is over. That is our priority. That's who we are in Canada. We help each other. We're there for each other. That's the only way that we can get through this crisis together and have an economy that bounces back afterwards. That's who we are, being there for each other.
Yes, please. Premier Higgs also says he fears that equalization payments that some provinces have come to rely on will be less lucrative in the near future as so-called have provinces struggle more than ever. Can you assure the provinces that they will not see a decline in equalization in the coming years?
Yeah. Equalization has a formula that has long been set, and we will continue to look at ways to ensure that it's working for provinces right across the country. It's important that Canadians in every province receive the services to which they are entitled right across the country. That's what equalization is about, and we support that principle very strongly.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada.
Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada. When you look at what's happening in these seniors' homes now, do you regret that you were not more generous with health transfers? The provinces were asking for a 5% increase. Do you now regret that you were not more generous? Well, I think we always have to reflect on what's happening in the seniors' homes. Now, perhaps we should have a discussion as to whether our seniors' homes should be part of the healthcare system and governed under the Canada Health Act. There are another number of suggestions that have been made and a number of discussions we can have in the coming months. But for the time being, my priority is to ensure that we're helping the people who are suffering now and tomorrow, and that's what we'll do. Now, do you think that that could come up against resistance from the provinces, since this is their area of jurisdiction? And if you did that, would there be conditions with respect to the use of that money? Well, that's a very good question, and these are questions that we'll be looking at in our discussions between the federal government and the provinces. We are a federation. We have to adapt to the realities of each new situation and the world in which we live. And we are resolute in our desire to help our fellow citizens and to care for our fellow citizens. And that's what we will be working together to do. There will be a lot of reflection and discussion once this pandemic is over. But for now, we are working together to ensure that we are looking after all Canadians.
Good morning, Prime Minister Salima Shifty, CBC. I want to go back to what you said about the federal government coordinating the reopening of provinces. You talked about guidelines. What sort of guidelines is your government giving the provinces, and would you ever go so far as to tell a province not to reopen something?
I think we all understand that the gains that we have made in controlling the spread of COVID-19 to this point have come because people have been very, very diligent across the country about staying home, about not working unless it's essential, about not going out unless it's essential, to both protect essential workers and specifically to prevent our health system from getting overloaded. That has been successful. We also have seen that because of that success, we can now talk about gradually or carefully reopening economic activity in certain sectors. But we have to be very, very careful. That's why what we're working on in collaboration with the provinces is a set of principles and elements that should be in place and should be followed as provinces make the decisions on how and what they will reopen, when, and if even. Things like ensuring proper levels of testing across the province and contact tracing, but other things like ensuring workplace safety. If people work in cubicles, if they work in a startup with beanbags, if they work on a shop floor, if they work in a food production facility, what are the measures that need to be put in place to keep them safe? These are principles saying you need to make sure that workplaces that reopen are safe in health norms, but what those actually are, what that will look like, will be up to the provinces and the local jurisdictions to determine. But we need to make sure that as we look at economic reopening, we are grounding ourselves in the principles that'll ensure that we don't allow for further spread or a new spike of COVID-19. And if there are cases that start to resurge, as likely will happen here and there, that we are able to manage, control, and reduce them rapidly.
We got a lot more details on the Nova Scotia shooting this morning and the timeline with the gunman. We do now know that there was a call made to 911 and the RCMP were informed that the gunman was wearing a uniform, RCMP uniform, as well as driving a car that looked like an RCMP car. And yet there was still no emergency alert. Do you see that as a failure on the part of the RCMP?
I think right now we need to be there for the people of Nova Scotia, for the families and communities that are grieving, and give them all the support we can. Part of that support needs to be answering their many, many questions. Questions about what happened during the incident, what happened to their loved ones, but also questions about the police response and what exactly happened and what could have happened differently or better. Those questions are things that we are going to need to answer, and we're going to work very hard to ensure that those questions are answered.
Ian Wood, CTV News. Prime Minister, the Nova Scotia emergency response teams in Halifax and the shootings took place in rural communities across the province. It took over 12 hours to apprehend the shooter, and the RCMP have highlighted that this was a very difficult situation to be in. Are you confident that the RCMP is adequately resourced in rural communities?
I think these are questions that people are going to be asking right now in Nova Scotia, but indeed all across the country. And they are questions that we don't have the answers to yet. We need to understand exactly what happened, understand how the response was, understand where the response could have been better with different resources or different protocols in place, and ensure that, as from any tragedy of this scale, we learn and we improve to make sure that it never happens again.
Many of the financial aid measures that have been announced so far, whether they be personal or for business, have only been committed at this point through June, but with no end of the restrictions being loosened. You yourself just said earlier that we're not out of the woods yet. Should people and businesses expect those aid measures to be extended, or will they be on their own come the summer?
As we've seen from countries around the world, there is a lot of reflection on how we reopen the economy, how it happens gradually, whether there is a scaling down of certain measures, whether certain measures need to be continued fully for many more months. These are reflections that we will, of course, engage in with businesses, with Canadians over the coming months as we look at careful reopening, as we continue to remain closed and vigilant in other areas. areas. The situation is ongoing, and as we have been from the very beginning, we will adjust and adapt to what we see actually happening. We will be there to support Canadians in the right way, in both ensuring that we get through this health crisis and ensuring that we come back as strongly in terms of the economy as we possibly can. But the only way to be able to do that is to make sure that for now and for the coming weeks, we remain extremely vigilant and we keep up with the social distancing rules.
Brian Mullen, Global News. Prime Minister, following up on some of the previous questions, some businesses say the rent relief announcement is too little too late and they've already had to close. How concerned are you that the long-term impact of this shutdown could be permanent for some sectors of the economy?
We moved forward on access to credit for small businesses quite quickly. We tried to ensure that through the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and the wage subsidy, that there be responses to businesses and to workers as quickly as possible to allow them to continue to pay for their groceries and their rent at home and support their families. We know certain businesses are extremely hard hit, and that's why the access to credit and the support for the rent is going to be important. But we also see that this is the greatest economic impact and event of our lifetimes, and it is going to be extremely difficult. Our focus is on recognizing that, first of all, our economy and our businesses were in excellent shape before. The services that were needed, the activities we had as a country were going very, very well. This is an event that put us into deep freeze, put us into hibernation, as it were, and everyone had to stop and hold while we let this wave of COVID pass through. And our ability to hold well depends on many things, but including government's ability to support people, to demonstrate that we will be there to make sure that as many as possible of our businesses will be able to bounce back afterwards. We are working to try and get help out to as many people as possible. Some sectors are more hard hit than others, but we know at the end of this, people will need to travel for work, for pleasure. People will need to go to restaurants. People will need to become tourists again in different places across the country and around the world. There are businesses that are hardest hit now who will be able to restart later. And that is our focus on trying to get through this moment of hibernation, which Canadians are doing quite well, as you would imagine.
And a follow-up question about violence against women in rural areas. This has long been an issue looking back at the Renfrew County massacre in 2015, which left 3 women dead, and this recent mass shooting. What can the federal government do to ensure the safety of women in rural, remote areas who are at risk of violence?
We have made significant investments over the past years in shelters for victims of domestic violence, of shelters of women facing gender-based violence. We've moved forward with a gender-based violence strategy. We are looking at stronger gun control measures that will include things like red flag laws that will give people the capacity not just to remove guns, but to prevent people from acquiring new guns if there are issues around domestic violence. But we recognize that there is so much more to do. And that is why, as a government and as Canadians, we need to continually pledge ourselves to be allies and solutions in the fight against gender-based violence.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde.
And that is the Prime Minister of Canada with his daily COVID-19 briefing. You could see there on the trees behind him a touch of Nova Scotia tartan to commemorate the victims lost last weekend, because there is a virtual vigil later this evening. Let's bring in Vashi Kapelis and the CBC's Catherine Cullen to go over a bit of what the Prime Minister had to say. Some relief coming for commercial rent for small businesses. Vashi, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so the announcement today, highly anticipated by small business owners right across the country who are worried about having to pay that rent in a few days' time or a week's time on May 1st. The announcement is that the government will enable commercial property owners to reduce that rent so that the tenant, the business owner, is only paying a quarter of it. Other than that, they'll provide forgivable loans to the landlord, about half of what the remaining balance, in order for the overall rent to kind of be reduced, but specifically the rent for the small business owner to be reduced. The key takeaway here is who qualifies. So you have to pay less than $50,000. The business has to pay less than $50,000 in rent, and also has to show that their revenues have dropped by 70%. The Prime Minister signaled that there would be additional help coming for bigger businesses where rent is higher than $50,000 rather. He didn't specify exactly what that rent would be. I think for me, the big takeaway right now, or sort of the outstanding questions, is how will this process work? How fast can the money actually get out the door? Obviously, given the timing of it, and there were a number of questions to the Prime Minister from, vis-a-vis businesses which already had to close because they, for example, weren't able to pay their April 1st rent. In this province in Ontario, if you didn't pay that rent, landlords could actually kick you out by April 16th. And the landlords, of course, need that rent as well to cover their mortgage. Sure. So it's a bit of a cyclical thing. This is will be welcome news, certainly, for a number of businesses that were worried about this very specific issue, but it will depend very much on how fast that money can get out the door.
And as you said, because they have access to that loan, the $40,000, $10,000 of which would be forgivable, you could imagine that the owner of the business could go rent-free for a period of time if they are able to tap into the loan as well. So
yeah, they can qualify for both.
Yeah, even if they're having financial problems. I mean, Catherine, I'll get you to weigh in on this because I know you're working on it today. I am struck that by the fact that they were able to come up with a deal with the provinces, because this is provincial jurisdiction, and they did manage to get that done relatively quickly, I think.
Yeah, a lot of discussion about federal and provincial jurisdiction right now. Another issue that the Prime Minister raised there, which is the top-up for essential workers, something that is going to be, I think, a key element in trying to address the situation in long-term care homes in particular. The Prime Minister signaling there that those discussions are still underway in terms of how it would work. Our understanding is that the provinces are going to have quite a bit of say in who is deemed an essential worker, but obviously long-term care homes workers in there, people who are particularly, as the Prime Minister put it the other day, financially vulnerable, but would be one of the targets of this money. Also interesting to hear him weigh in on the process of reopening, Rosemary. Yeah. Obviously, yesterday we heard Scott Moe, Saskatchewan Premier, outlining his province's 5-phase plan for reopening. The first phase of that beginning May 4th. Today we're expecting to hear from New Brunswick's Blaine Higgs. They have a 4-phase plan. We'll learn a little bit more about how that works. But the Prime Minister is saying there are going to be guidelines, elements, he said, that they hope that the whole country can agree on in terms of where the standards are for how this reopening happens. He was asked by our colleague Salima Shivji essentially whether or not anything was going to be mandatory, was the gist of the question. He said that there are principles and elements that should be in place and should be followed. So it will be interesting to see how that balance is struck between what the federal government is looking for here and what the provinces want to do.
Yeah, because the federal government can say things and can give guidance. It doesn't mean that the provinces have to follow that to the letter. Okay, we'll come back to both of you. Thank you very much, Vashi and Catherine. First, though, I want to talk a little bit more about how the Prime Minister started out his briefing today, and that's talking about Nova Scotia, because there will be an online vigil held tonight to pay tribute to victims of last weekend's shooting there. For more on how people are grieving, we've reached Tori Finney. He's a co-organizer of tonight's vigil, and he joins us from Bass River community that neighbors Portapique. Good to see you. Good to see you, Tori. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
So I know lots of people are I don't know if looking forward is the right word, but people are anticipating this tonight because they are sort of desperate to connect with one another right now. Tell me what people can expect and why you wanted to do it.
Sure. Tonight's event is going to consist of messages from political figures as well as spiritual leaders, musicians and celebrities. And the reason, I guess, is there's a group of us, several dedicated volunteers who've been working together to put this together for the the community, the province, the country, but especially the families.
Mm-hmm. How important do you think this will be, given the fact that no one can really get together right now because of the pandemic?
Extremely. It's vital. Typically, we would be gathering together, at churches and community centers, but we can't right now, and we have to do something. And this is a great way for us to come together for an hour and a half to celebrate the lives of these fantastic people and to help our community start to heal.
You said you're going to have some celebrities. I would be not doing my job as a journalist if I didn't ask you to give us a little hint of someone we might hear from, or who might play some music, or to have a message for Nova Scotia.
I would love to be able to do that, and I would just encourage everyone to tune in and join us, and we can celebrate it together.
Well, you're good at your job too, then, if you're not answering. Let me just get a sense from you. I know you're a community over from Portapique, and I don't know the region very well, but Brett Ruskin's certainly been painting a good picture of the place for me. How are people doing? What is your sense of how people are doing, given the community and the way they live together?
I think we're still in a state of shock here. We haven't had time to process this. It's been a matter of days. That's all I can really say. I mean, it's devastation. And I hope that the vigil tonight will be the start of a healing process, but time will tell.
Did you know anyone who was killed, Tori? Is that part of why you wanted to do this, or?
In these communities, you don't have to look far to connect people. My personal reasons are just I had an opportunity to work with this amazing group of volunteers, and I couldn't say no to that, and it just kind of went from there, and I'm really honored to be a part of it.
Well, we're very pleased you're doing it, and our thanks to all the volunteers who are putting this together so quickly. I do think it'll be an important moment for Nova Scotia, but also the whole country. Tori Finney, thank you. Good luck with the vigil tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Tori Finney is one of those organizers of the vigil, and don't forget, you will be able to watch it live here on CBC News Network, as well as CBC throughout the Atlantic provinces. It starts at 7 p.m. Atlantic time, 6 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you tune in for that. I'm Rosemary Barton. Continuing coverage now on CBC News Network and CBC.ca. Hello again, I'm Rosemary Barton here on CBC News Network and streaming around the world on CBC.ca or on our news app. We are following all the day's developments today, of course, on the pandemic. The Prime Minister has just announced more help for small businesses, this time in the form of commercial rent relief, an agreement that he made with the provinces. All provinces have agreed to this. We'll have some of those details in a moment. We will also, too, at the top of the hour, very soon, hear from federal ministers in Ottawa on the COVID-19 situation. But first, we do want to turn back to Nova Scotia because the RCMP this morning revealed a detailed timeline of how that shooting rampage played out, the one that left 22 people dead last weekend. It includes some chilling new details about how the gunman was able to carry out those killings and elude law enforcement for 13 hours until he was then killed by the RCMP. All of this, of course, as the RCMP continue to face questions about the response and why an emergency alert was not activated. And we'll also, as I mentioned earlier, talk about that virtual vigil tonight planned for 7 Atlantic and 6 p.m. Eastern time. Let me bring in the CBC's Brett Ruskin, who is in Portapique again today, to go through some of what we found out from the RCMP. There were lots of sort of sort of jaw-dropping details, Brett. In particular, we now know that the fact that the gunman was dressed as a police officer and had an RCMP vehicle certainly seemed to allow him to elude police and resulted in other deaths.
That's right. So, I mean, let me situate us to where we are here. First of all, police blockade there. That is the one road to Portapique, Nova Scotia. You can see a memorial there with people gathering to lay flowers and notes for victims' families. And so it was down that roadway that this all began. And there were a series of checkpoints or perimeters set up by RCMP. We don't know exactly where they are, but again, this being the one road, there may have been one here. And then there's another major intersection down the road from there. That could have been another spot where a perimeter was set up. We heard from the superintendent that in his 30 years of policing, he can't think of any more horrific of a circumstances than looking for someone who looks like you. That's what officers were doing. They were searching for a shooter who looked like them, in their uniform, in their police car. It perhaps assisted them or facilitated his escape from those perimeters because he was in that car. That is a possibility. If there's cars going around, we heard that there's 25 units that responded immediately to the scene here. If there was one car that slipped out, we heard that it may have been going through a field at one point. There could have been a vehicle going through a field. That could have been the suspect. That could have been the shooter as well. So.
And we certainly know that when he was apprehended, he was no longer in that vehicle and no longer in the uniform, which he had discarded. So that also became part of how they did manage to capture and ultimately kill the gunman too, Brett.
That's right. So he didn't have the vehicle, but while he did have the vehicle, I just wanted to mention one more fact about the fact that he had these clothing as well as the vehicle, the RCMP vehicle, because we had heard rumors about this, but it was confirmed in this news conference that at least one situation, and again with a police officer himself, he pulled someone over using his replica police car, walked up to that person as if they were being pulled over by a genuine, authentic police officer, walked up to their window and shot them in their car. So just horrific details that we are hearing. And the police car that he was driving, the replica police car, was then swapped out. He took a silver SUV and then a third vehicle, which was a Mazda 3, which he acquired by killing the occupant of that vehicle, a 54-year-old woman from Shubenacadie, and then continued on to that gas station in Enfield, Nova Scotia, just near the airport, international airport here. And that is where he encountered an officer who spotted him, recognized him, and then opened fire and killed him there in that gas station. That is how all of this wrapped up after, again, 14 hours of this manhunt that began here and ended far away, nearly 100 kilometers away in Nova Scotia, in Enfield.
Okay, Brett Ruskin again in Portapique, Nova Scotia today. Thank you for that, Brett. Appreciate it. Let me just highlight a couple other things that stood out for me, only because they are questions that may come up with federal officials as well. First of all, that one of the guns, one of the weapons the gunman used was traced back to Canada, but others seem to have been obtained in the United States. So there will be questions about how he was able to get them here from the United States. The RCMP also suggesting today that there did appear to be a list of individuals the gunman was targeting because he went to particular homes and knocked on the door, including one home where they would not let him in. And so they talked a little bit about that as well. There were also questions about the emergency alert. Again, the RCMP saying that they had believed that they had contained the area. Which was not, in fact, the case, as we now know. All right, we'll continue that coverage, of course, through the day and on to the vigil later tonight. Let me bring in my colleagues, CBC's Catherine Cullen and Vashi Capellas, as we wait for federal ministers. Vashi, I know you're going to be part of that vigil later. You know what, the officials are walking in, but maybe I'll just get you to quickly weigh in on some of the issues there that I think are going to resonate in terms of accountability and questions on a federal level. The guns are certainly important, and the emergency alert as well.
Yeah, the emergency alert for sure. We heard from the RCMP today that at the time they felt the suspect, dead or alive, was within the perimeter that they had secured, but that alert therefore didn't go out. It just came out on Twitter to a degree, so still some questions about that. Also accountability questions you heard at the end of the presser there with the Prime Minister around resources, rural resources for the RCMP. That's a shared jurisdictional issue for sure between the federal government and the province, but it took me about 30 seconds to look up a study from last May that the Committee on Public Safety did looking into that very issue, which very firmly established that resources there were wanting. I think, going ahead, obviously we don't have all the details, but those are going to persist as questions too.
Okay, I'm going to turn away from both of you for a moment, if you don't mind, and bring us to the federal briefing led by Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. Let's bring that to you now live.
We are going to end this press conference at 1 p.m. sharp, indeed a few moments before 1 p.m., in order to observe a minute of silence to honor and mourn the victims of the Nova Scotia shooting. Okay, Dr. Tam, please.
Hello, everyone, and bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Hello, everyone.
As usual, with the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 42,750 confirmed cases, including 2,179 deaths. To date, labs across Canada have tested over 643,000 people, with over 6.5% of these testing positive. As outbreaks in long-term care homes continue to define one of our biggest struggles and deepest heartaches with COVID-19, I want to highlight the work of those who have endured and those who have rushed in to help. I'd like to do this in a personal story shared with one of my staff. This is the story of Michelle, a nurse in Nova Scotia, who was recently reassigned to care for COVID-19 patients at a nursing home. To minimize any risk to her family, she has decided to live in a hotel for the duration of her work assignment. Sensing her unease, her 3 children wanted to give her a boost and let her know they understood. So in a poem, they, and with a little help from Dad, wrote, "My mom is a hero, so make no mistake. If the world ever needs her, she'll do whatever it takes. We know that she worries. Please don't, we're fine. We know the world needs a hero, so it can borrow mine." Healthcare workers across Canada are going the extra mile every day to care for our most vulnerable. We cannot let their sacrifice or the personal risk they are taking to be in vain. However, these weeks have been hard on everyone, whether at home or on our supply roads, in grocery stores, pharmacies, or on the front lines of healthcare. No one can measure one person's struggle against another. There is always more to the story. If you are struggling at home with anxiety, fear, violence, problematic substance use, or other concerns, there's help. You can find a full range of supports through our new Wellness Together Canada portal that is dedicated to providing resources for mental wellness. You can access the portal through canada.ca/coronavirus website or the Canada COVID-19 app. I'll end by paraphrasing Michelle herself. To all of our essential service heroes out there, stay safe. To everyone else, please stay home and stay within your bubble. Give a hug to your loved ones. Hug it out for our heroes and for all those who are isolated while they cannot hug their own. Stay home. Save lives, Canada. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Tam, and that was a very touching story. Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you very much, especially Michelle's 3 children. You guys are right, your mother is a hero, and thank you for giving her up and lending her to other people for a while. Okay, maintenant je donne la parole à Dr. Howard New.
And now over to Dr. Howard New. Go ahead, Howard. Thank you. First of all, here are the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 42,750 confirmed cases, including 2,179 deaths. To date, labs across Canada have tested over 643,000 people, with over 6.5% of these testing positive. As outbreaks in long-term care homes continue to define one of our biggest struggles and deepest heartaches with COVID-19, I want to highlight the work of those who have endured and those who have rushed in to help. To do so, I'd like to tell you a personal story shared with one of my staff. This is the story of Michelle, a nurse in Nova Scotia who was recently reassigned to care for COVID-19 patients at a nursing home. To minimize any risk to her family, she has decided to live in a hotel for the during of her work assignment. Sensing her unease, her 3 children wanted to give her a boost and let her know they understood. So, in a poem, they wrote with a little help from Dad, "My mom is a hero, so make no mistake. If the world ever needs her, she'll do whatever it takes. We know that she worries. Please don't. We're fine. We know the world needs a hero, so it can borrow mine." Every day, healthcare workers across Canada are going the extra mile to care for our most vulnerable. We cannot let their sacrifice or the personal risks they are taking be in vain. However, these last weeks have been hard on everyone, whether at home or on our supply roads, in grocery stores, pharmacies, or on the front lines of healthcare. No one can measure one person's struggle against another. There is always more to the story. If you are struggling at home with anxiety, fear, violence, problematic substance abuse, or other concerns, there is help. You can find a full range of supports through our new Wellness Together Canada portal that is dedicated to providing resources for mental wellness. You can access the portal through the canada.ca/coronavirus website or the Canada COVID-19 app. I'll end by paraphrasing Michelle herself. To all our essential service heroes out there, stay safe. To everyone else, please stay at home. And staying within your bubble, give a hug to your loved ones. Hug it out for our heroes and for all those who are isolated, while they cannot hug their own. Stay home, save lives, Canada. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. New. And now,
thank you very much, Dr. New.
Finance, Bill Morneau. Bill, please.
Well, thanks, Christia, and good afternoon. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about small businesses, and I know my colleague Mary-Ing will be talking about the same subject after me. We know that so many small businesses have been hit so hard during the course of this COVID-19 crisis. And so what we want to talk about today is a program that will help them with their rent payments. For the last week or so, we've been working together with provincial and territorial partners to bring significant relief to struggling small businesses. And I'm pleased to say that we now have agreements in principle with all of the territories and provinces to offer the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. Through the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, we'll offer qualifying commercial property owners forgivable loans that will cover 50% of impacted tenants' rent, in exchange for them providing a rent reduction of at least 75% and agreeing to a moratorium on evictions. And we know that this is working together. We all have to do our part in supporting those who are facing economic hardship. The Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program will be available for qualifying commercial property owners with tenants that pay less than $50,000 a month in rent and that have experienced at least a 70% decrease in their revenues. Eligible tenants will include small businesses, nonprofit, and charitable organizations. Eligible landlords who've already stepped up and offered 75% or more reductions for April or May, or who would like to retroactively do so, can apply. We expect that this new benefit will be available starting in mid-May. With the first month of it around the corner, we're asking that landlords try to be flexible as they work with their tenants in the coming days. Nous avons maintenant un accord de principe.
We now have an agreement in principle with all provinces and territories to offer emergency assistance to commercial property owners to help small businesses that have been hard hit by the crisis. Through the Canadian Housing and Mortgage Corporation, we will be providing the owners of commercial buildings forgivable loans that cover 50% of the rent, in exchange for a reduction in that rent of at least 75%, and that those owners also agree to a moratorium on evictions. The Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program will be offered to the owners of commercial properties who pay less than $50,000 per month in rent, and who have seen a loss of at least 70% in their revenues. Eligible tenants include small businesses, not-for-profit organizations, and charitable organizations. The building owners who have offered at least 75% rent relief to their tenants can also send an application retroactively. This program will be available as of mid-May.
Significantly affected small businesses. This supports on top of the interest-free Canada Emergency Business Account loans with forgivable portions of up to 25%. It's on top of also the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy benefit. And of course, it's in addition to the deferral of income taxes, GST, HST payments, and customs duties. Finally, we're also providing significant credit support through the Business Development Bank and Export Development Bank of Canada, and for people, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit for those of you who are off from work or on furlough. Our response plan, Canada's COVID-19 economic response plan, is among the most ambitious and generous among G7 countries because we believe that by taking action now, we will be more prepared to get out of this challenge when we get through it. So thank you very much. Thanks, Christia.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. Now we will hear from our Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and International Trade, Mary Ng. Mary, please.
Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you, Bill. Bonjour tout le monde. And
hello, everyone.
Small business owners, entrepreneurs, and sole proprietors and communities across the country. More help is on the way. You've just heard that from the Finance Minister. We know that in this difficult time, many of you are struggling to keep those lights on. And you're making incredible sacrifices to help Canadians stay safe by flattening the curve and, in many cases, temporarily closing your doors down. And while we've seen a severe downturn in businesses or you've had to close your doors to COVID-19, it doesn't mean that your commercial rents payments have had to stop. We've put help out there to help with your expenses by deferring customs duties and tax payments, creating a 75% wage subsidy and a variety of lending supports. But we've certainly heard loud and clear from small business owners that you need help with your rent. And today is that relief. And as you've heard, we're partnering with the provinces and territories for businesses who are experiencing hardship as a result of their rent payments for April, May, and June. And under these rent agreements, we are going to be able to provide forgivable loans to incentivize commercial property owners to help their small business tenants with rent by at least 75% and to refrain from evictions. This
is about supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs, for those who need our help the most.
Who's made the tough decision to close their doors can now be helped with their rent payment. It also means that that local furniture store that usually relies on Main Street foot traffic can stay afloat to cover the costs of their warehouse space. Or that self-employed beauty salon owner who can't take on clients right now, that she's going to be able to keep up with her rent until it's safe to open her doors again. Our work is far from over, and we're going to keep listening, we're going to keep acting, and we'll keep supporting you every step of the way through this crisis. And I want to thank Canadian small business owners for your resilience during this period. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mary. Now we will hear from the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Navdeep Bains. Nav, please.
Thank you very much, Christia, and good afternoon, everyone. Je suis heureux d'être ici aujourd'hui pour faire une mise à jour.
I'm happy to be here today to update you on our industrial mobilization efforts in addressing.
Our approach has been the same from the start. Companies reach out to us online through our portal, nearly 6,000 since the start a month ago, and we look at these offers against the needs of Canadians. When there's a promising match, we sign a letter of intent. Then we work with the company to support retooling, and often this means bringing companies together in new partnerships and supply chains. Finally, we finish by signing a contract for purchase. So I'll start with some progress on letters of intent for medical gowns. We facilitated the transformation of construction house wrap from inter-tap polymer and airbag materials from Autoliv into fabrics that meet the strict requirements necessary to use in the manufacturing of medical-grade gowns. By connecting these two firms with Canadian apparel manufacturers from across the country, they can now sew medical gowns with this new made-in-Canada fabric, effectively bypassing fabric shortages with an entirely new supply chain. This has enabled us to move forward from letters of intent to contracts with Mustang Survival, George Corey, Rudel, and Yoga Jeans. These companies join the ranks of Stanfield, Calco Group, and Canada Goose as Canadian apparel companies stepping up to provide critical medical gowns. In total, contracts with these 7 companies have resulted in more than 18 million gowns, with deliveries starting this week. I'll share one more example of how these new partnerships in Canadian industry have helped us in the fight against COVID-19. Luminultra, a producer of testing reagents in New Brunswick, was in short supply of chemicals for production. Having reached out to us through that portal that I mentioned earlier, we connected Luminultra to chemical supplies in Canada so they could keep on producing reagents critical to testing. Now let me move on to retooling efforts on face shields and masks. Canadian manufacturers have stepped up in difficult times to retool in the fight against COVID-19. And many of them are from an automotive sector, a sector that I'm very familiar with. I started my career in that sector. And we're working on contracts with more than a dozen companies that will deliver millions of face shields, including the likes of Windsor Mold, Dynaplast, and Inksmith. And this allows us to meet current requests from provinces and territories with Canadian supplies. We've also signed a letter of intent with General Motors, and they're working to retool its Oshawa assembly plant to help with the mass production here in Canada, and we're assisting them in this process. Bravo à toutes les entreprises qui se sont réorganisées.
I applaud all of the companies who have retooled to assist in these efforts to strengthen our domestic supply chain.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you, Nav. And now we'll hear from the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, Anita Anand. Anita, please.
Merci beaucoup, Christia, et bonjour.
Thank you, Christia. Hello, everyone.
Before I begin, let me say that as someone born and raised in Nova Scotia, my heart goes out to everyone who lost loved ones and friends this past weekend. This tragedy comes as we work to contain COVID-19, making it ever so difficult to grieve together. From spending the first 18 years of my life in Nova Scotia, I know that Nova Scotians are a very closely knit group. In these tragic times, know that I and all of Canada stands with you.
As we continue to fight the spread of COVID-19, my department continues to make aggressive and proactive purchases of the personal protective equipment and medical supplies that will help see us through this pandemic.
Today, I will be addressing international procurements, domestic production, and I will provide an update on our procurements. Given the intense global demand for equipment and supplies, we are facing many challenges. Much of the world's supply is manufactured in China, and moving materials out of that country is highly complex. We have experienced challenges, as the Prime Minister discussed earlier this week. I want to reassure Canadians that we continue to adjust and refine our logistical and diplomatic approaches on the ground, not just in response to supply chain challenges, but in anticipation of these challenges. The aggressive approach that we are taking to expeditiously bring home supplies means that we are building in contingencies, overbuying in some cases, and implementing rigorous product testing. Progress is being made. We have received 6 plane loads carrying supplies from China since last Friday alone, and over 10 carriers have brought goods back to Canada overall from China. They have helped to carry millions more N95 respirators and surgical masks into Canada that are now in the Public Health Agency for testing. I want to thank Air Canada and Cargojet for continuing to step up and deliver. Last weekend, we also received an international shipment of an important base chemical needed for producing reagent, as my colleague Minister Baines mentioned, at Lumen Ultra in New Brunswick, which will allow for more COVID-19 testing. The company is now gearing up to deliver reagent for up to 500,000 tests on a weekly basis. Les produits importés sont soumis à des tests rigoureux.
Imported products undergo rigorous testing, both at the source and in Canada, where they are inspected by the Public Health Agency of Canada. Quality issues, while unwelcome, are not unexpected given the surge in global demand for these goods.
Supplies are not only coming from abroad. Domestic production is ramping up and Canadian companies are delivering. I am pleased to announce with my colleague Minister Baines that this week we have signed contracts with 3 more Canadian companies, including Jacobs and Thompson out of Toronto, Windsor Mold Group out of Windsor, Ontario, to produce a total of 16 million medical face shields. The third company, Canadian Shield out of Kitchener, has moved from 3D printing to laser cutting technology to produce masks that can be easily sanitized for reuse. These are great examples of Canadian ingenuity and innovation.
I am inspired by the way that these and other companies have risen to the challenge, and I am proud to say that we continue to add to our Canadian lineup.
While the data may appear promising in some parts of the country, models suggest that there may be future outbreaks even after we get through this first peak. In terms of our procurements, this possibility means that we are still preparing for all eventualities. In light of this reality, I am pleased to announce that Stryker, a company headquartered in Waterdown and with production based in Quebec City, will provide us with 82 sterilization units that have been approved by Health Canada. These machines allow for the sterilization and reuse of equipment like N95 respirators, extending the life cycle of this important piece of equipment in healthcare facilities across the country. Je suis heureuse d'annoncer que Stryker,
I am pleased to announce that Stryker, a company headquartered in Waterdown and with production based in Quebec City, will provide us with 82 sterilization units that have been approved by Health Canada. These machines allow for the sterilization and reuse of equipment like N95 respirators, extending the life cycle of this important piece of equipment in healthcare facilities across the country. We have also signed contracts to meet the potential needs for up to 10 mobile health hubs. These units, which are built specifically for providing respiratory care, so that local health authorities can address overflows of patients if necessary.
We hope the surge capacity will not be needed. We are taking every precaution to keep Canadians safe. The COVID-19 situation is very worrying and stressful, and Canadians want to know what we are doing to protect them. We are taking new steps to be as transparent as possible and to keep Canadians up to date on our work. Today, we are launching an online report detailing the progress that we are making on procuring key
Okay, we are going to pull away from this federal briefing. The last few minutes we have heard about procurement and the creation of a new supply chain in Canada to make some of the much-needed PPE. But let's go now to Vancouver, where Ontario Premier Doug Ford is making an announcement about the province's response to COVID-19 and his request to call in the military to help at long-term care centres. Here is the Premier.
We're all paying a price, but I want you to know that your efforts, that your collective efforts are paying off. We saw in this week's modeling that community spread is heading in the right direction. That's because we're all doing our part. People are staying home, self-isolating, and our businesses have stepped up in a big way. Businesses across Ontario are paying a heavy price to put their people and their communities first. And our small and medium-sized businesses are the backbone of our economy. They're the cornerstones of our communities. Our restaurants, bars, our hospitality and tourism sector, our mom and pop shops, they've been among the hardest hit. And we all have to do everything we can to support them. We're allowing bars and restaurants to sell alcohol with their delivery or takeout orders. We've delivered $10 billion in tax deferrals, WSIB relief, and other supports. And we worked with the federal government to provide loans and wage subsidies to help these businesses stay afloat. This is a strong start, but we can and we will do more. We will leave nothing on the table when it comes to supporting Ontario through this. And today, more help is here for our small businesses. We're delivering emergency commercial rent relief to our Ontario small businesses and landlords. In total, over $900 million will go towards helping these businesses make rent and keep people employed. And I know it's not just businesses paying rent, it's many residential renters as well. And with May the 1st around the corner, many tenants are feeling anxious about the rent right now. I want to be very clear. If you're working, if you have an income, if you're able to, you must pay rent. But for the countless of people out there, for those who have had their livelihoods impacted, for the workers who've lost their jobs, we will have your back. We have frozen evictions so you won't lose your home. And today, I will ask the Prime Minister to work with us on a program to support residential rent tenants. I want to thank Minister Clark for his work pushing the federal government for residential rent relief. My friends, we're doing everything in our power to help Ontario adapt to the new reality. And now we must begin the hard work of recovery. Early next week, we'll be releasing our framework for reopening Ontario's economy. It will provide a gradual and measured approach to opening up. Let me be clear, the health and safety of Ontario will always come first. I want to thank all of our wonderful small businesses, our cooks, cleaners, and restaurant staff. Thank you to the people who keep food on our tables. Thank you to everyone who is putting others first by staying at home. We're working around the clock for all of you. We will get through this together, and thank you, and God bless the people of Ontario. Now I'll invite Minister Phillips up.
Thank you, Premier Ford, and good afternoon. Under the leadership of Premier Ford, Minister Elliott, and Minister Fullerton, we have taken decisive action to stop the spread of COVID-19, and so have the people of Ontario, including the business community, who have gone above and beyond to do their part. But we know that some of the necessary measures put in place have come at a cost, especially for small and medium-sized business owners. In particular, we've heard from commercial tenants and their landlords about the challenges facing these businesses as they experience challenges paying their rent. Support is urgently needed. And that is why we're partnering with the federal government to deliver the Ontario, Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. Our government has committed $241 million to deliver urgent and much-needed relief of more than $900 million to Ontario business tenants and their landlords. To receive this support, property owners will be required to reduce the rental costs of a small business tenant by 75% for April, May, and June, and commit to a moratorium on evictions. By providing support now, we'll help small businesses get through this challenging time so that they can be part of the recovery when the province reopens. I would like to thank the federal government and my counterpart, Minister Morneau, for joining us in this important investment. We've worked with the federal government to bring commercial rent relief, and when they stepped forward, our government didn't hesitate to partner in a meaningful way to provide support for our small and medium-sized businesses. I will continue to urge my federal colleagues to ensure rental relief arrives as quickly as possible. It cannot come fast enough. Today's commitment builds on Ontario's action plan responding to COVID-19, which provided $17 billion in relief for people and employers. As the Premier mentioned, the action plan includes $10 billion in cash flow support for businesses so they can keep employees on the payroll and the lights on in their businesses. From eliminating the employer health tax for 90% of businesses in this province, to deferring payments and interest on provincial taxes, WSIB premiums, and enabling property tax relief. At the new Ontario Jobs and Recovery Committee, we have already started to plan for the next phase, Ontario's action plan, reopening our province. This team will work together to get our economy moving again, with a focus on job creation, opportunities for growth, and protecting our province from future threats. I want to conclude by encouraging everyone to continue to follow the advice of our public health officials. As I've said before, I was confident in Ontario before COVID-19, and I remain confident today. Thank you.
Well, before I take questions, I just want to mention that at 1 o'clock, we'll be joining the rest of the country in observing a moment of silence for the victims who lost their lives in the terrible tragedy in Nova Scotia this past weekend. My heart breaks for the families and loved ones, and I want them to know that you're all in our thoughts and our prayers during this extremely difficult time. We'll take questions now.
We'll go to the phone line. First question.
First question comes from Cynthia Mulligan from City News. Please go ahead.
Hello, Premier. I think I'd like to start. I'm sure I speak for all of the gallery where we offer you best wishes for your family after the news about your mother-in-law.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Cynthia.
Hey, I actually have a question for the health minister,
yes,
please. Minister, we know that thousands of surgeries have been canceled in the last month, 1,700 cancer surgeries, for example, thousands of other types of surgeries. I know you're talking about getting this back online, but are you worried that there will be a lot of collateral damage to people that don't have COVID-19 but will still suffer the health consequences?
Well, I know that there are many people who are waiting to have surgeries performed, from orthopedic surgeries to more pressingly cancer surgeries. This is something that I know is extremely anxiety-provoking for many people. They're worried about their own health and safety, but the decisions were made based on a pandemic plan that was developed by Cancer Care Ontario. So those are the cases, however, I would say that we are going to be returning to as soon as we're able to start resuming elective surgeries once again. But because we're still in the peak of COVID-19, we still are getting numbers in over the 500s, in some cases over 600s on a daily basis, that we need to make sure that we are past the peak so that we know that we will have the hospital capacity that we need in order to get back to these surgeries. But we are planning for them already, and as soon as the Chief Medical Officer of Health gives us the indication that the peak has passed, that we will be starting those surgeries again immediately.
Do you have a timeline for that? Is that possibly weeks? And I know how incredibly busy you are and focused on COVID-19, but are there things that you haven't been able to get to that are falling through the cracks? For example, cystic fibrosis patients, before this all hit, they were begging for a new medication that could be potentially life-saving, and yet they are so incredibly vulnerable to COVID-19. Have you been able to push that forward through at all?
We're continuing to work on all of the other files that are important in health. I think with the cystic fibrosis medication, that is something that several of them haven't been passed through Health Canada as yet. So things have been slowed down, as you can, I'm sure, understand because of COVID-19, but we are still continuing that work, and that it's very busy with the COVID-19 issues, but the other issues are important to many people as well. So we are continuing to work on them, and when the Chief Medical Officer of Health tells us that the peak has passed, we'll be able to resume many issues, including the elective surgeries, including the work on some of these other important files as well.
Next question.
Next question comes from Alison Jones from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier.
Hi,
on the commercial rent relief program, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business is raising some concerns that the program is too reliant on landlords, that it will go through them rather than the businesses themselves that need help. How did you, in consultation with the federal government, arrive at the decision to make it operate this way?
Well, I'll pass this over to the Minister of Finance. He's handling that file. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that question, and we have been in frequent contact with Dan Kelly at the CFIB, and the program design certainly took into account many of the considerations that CFIB and small business owners across Ontario and Canada had in place. The important part of partnering with the landlords is that we are expecting them, as part of the program, to take 25% off of the rent. So they are an important partner in this. It also ensures that we can cover the broad swath of businesses because almost everyone has a landlord. So the structure of the program was meant to make sure that, in our case, we think there'll be hundreds of thousands of businesses in Ontario that will be able to take advantage of this. It was also meant to ensure that everybody did their part. There is an expectation that the small businesses will pay 25% of what they would have been paying, and that the landlord will be getting a substantial component, 75% of their expectation. But this was designed to be able to be implemented quickly. That's why we use the CFI, or the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, as the delivery mechanism. They have relationships because of mortgage insurance with 98% of the landlords already. So very much designed to be comprehensive, be able to cover the majority of the businesses that we're targeting, and that the money could be delivered quickly.
Thank you. And for, I guess, either the Premier or either of the other ministers on the military assistance for the 5 priority long-term care homes, what was the criteria used to decide which 5 homes to deploy to first? Some of the ones in the list obviously are not even close to the hardest hit in terms of numbers of deaths.
Thank you for the question. So we've been really monitoring very carefully the status of all our homes and looking at who is in greatest need. The staffing appears to be the main area of severe concern right now. And that is a major part of how we've determined to go with these 5 homes. But this is an issue that is changing. And so if other areas, other homes need assistance in this regard, more will be deployed.
Next question.
Next question comes from Haley Cooper from News Talk 1010. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. We've learned that Fiat Chrysler is planning on restarting production in the U.S. and Canada, including the one in Brampton on May 4th. And we just wanted to know how much consultation was done with your government and why this date was selected, because employees and their union have expressed grave concerns about this early restart and their health and safety. So what can you say to calm those concerns?
Well, I guess that's when the automotive industry right across North America is open. We've been consulting with the automotive part manufacturers, along with the automotive manufacturers themselves. I just got off the phone yesterday with the president of Toyota as well, and the supply chain won't move forward without the support of the region of North America. I have full confidence in the first of all, the unions and non-union automotive part manufacturers and the actual auto manufacturers themselves. They're very, very responsible organizations. They aren't going to jeopardize anything when it comes to health and safety, and I've heard that right from the president and CEO of many companies. They're going to make sure that they practice social distancing. They have proper PPE equipment for all their employees. And I've been through a majority of all the plants. They're very, very clean, well organized, and nothing is more important to these companies than the health and well-being of their employees. And I know that they're in communications with their unions, so I'm sure they'll be able to work things out and have a very safe working environment.
And Premier, we hear you every day speaking about just now health of employees, the health of the people of this province, and we want to know how you're doing. You're working day and night. There's so much pressure on your shoulders. You've expressed that your mother-in-law has tested positive. So how are you caring for yourself mentally and physically?
Well, I appreciate it. I'm fine. I feel, knock on wood, healthy as a horse right now, and it's not about our family. It's about the 78,000 families and long-term care and what they deal with day in and day out. It's about families that are worried about rent on May the 1st, and they've lost their jobs. Sometimes there's a couple, both of them lost their jobs, and they have 3 kids. That's what you call pressure. When you can't meet a mortgage, they're finding it tough to put food on the table. But I appreciate it, but believe me, it's all about the families. It's about the frontline healthcare workers over at West Park and every other long-term care facility that are risking everything, going in there day in and day out. And that's all I think about all day, all night, is how we're going to get through this, how we're going to support the people of Ontario. And as Premier, that's my job, to protect every single person, to make sure I advocate to the federal government and push the federal government, for instance, on rent. Rent alone, we're doing it with businesses. Now we need to do it with the tenants and landlords for their residents. And landlords, a lot of them aren't big landlords. They're just hardworking people that might have a couple of units, and they're trying to survive. And I want to thank, the federal government for all their help. They've been great, by the way. They've been absolutely fabulous. But we need more. We need more for residential rent. I know the Prime Minister mentioned about long-term care yesterday in the military. I need his help. Prime Minister, if you're listening, I need your help on long-term care. We need funding. And if we can provide funding, that will help us get through this and have a better, more sustainable long-term care facilities. So that's all that's on my mind, 24/7, literally 24/7. But thank you so much for asking.
Next question.
Next question comes from Mike Crawley at CBC News. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. Just to pick up on long-term care and your requests to the Prime Minister on the funding side of things, you've mentioned previously about the possibility of topping up the pay of long-term care workers, I guess in particular personal support workers. Any sense of when that's going to happen, how much it's going to be? Because we've been hearing reports that personal support workers are leaving, going to other minimum wage jobs because where they don't have to put their lives on the line.
Well, we're going to take care of them, Mike, and nothing's a tougher job than what they're facing right now. Just imagine having a loved one, husband, wife, brother, sister, that has to go into this job every single day. They're absolute heroes, and I just want to tell them that help is on the way. Our Minister of Finance is working on a program right now, along with the help of the federal government, and that will be released very shortly.
And my follow-up, Premier, when you look at starting to ease some of the restrictions, maybe allowing some non-essential businesses to start to open, have you given any thought to whether the phase-in might happen differently in different parts of Ontario? Because it seems that the pandemic isn't having the same level of impact in Northern Ontario as it is in Southern Ontario, and people in the North are wondering why the same solutions need to be imposed necessarily on them when the life in the North is so much different. So is there a possibility of some sort of slightly different regional phase-in of lifting the restrictions?
Yeah, great question, Mike. We're dealing with almost two different worlds. You have the urban, and you have the rural areas, but we're all connected. The problem with that, Mike, and I fully understand what you're saying, and I actually agree with what you're saying. We just can't. We just can't risk, someone in Toronto going up north. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this over to the Minister of Finance. He's putting a package together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So as the Premier mentioned, we will be releasing, Minister Elliott, the Premier and myself, the framework that will speak to those very questions. But as the Premier touched on, obviously we are experiencing in the suburban and urban areas different realities of community transmission than they are in some of the more rural areas. The considerations are absolutely the movement of people and the fact that people could move and may in fact be incented to move from one area to another based on differential restrictions in some of those areas. But this is absolutely, what the framework is considering. We're getting the very best health and science advice, as well as looking at it from an economic perspective. And as you will see, I know Saskatchewan, I think to their credit, they are further ahead in terms of their COVID issues, released a document. This is an issue that all of the provinces are going to need to be considering because of the nature of the size and scope of our provinces. I should mention as well, of course, you open up issues around cross-border. We're in conversations. There are two clusters of American states in the sort of New York-related cluster and then a Michigan and Midwestern cluster. So all of these are part of the complex considerations that will be part of the framework that comes together. But as always, I have to end by saying it'll be based on the best health and science advice and making sure that we protect the safety of Ontario workers. And I should mention, the Premier mentioned about Fiat Chrysler, that conversation before. One of the areas where there's a great deal of work being done is by our Minister of Labour and Skills Development, Monty McNaughton, in the Ministry of Labour, designing the sort of skilled or sort of safe workplace requirements and expectations with our health professionals so that workplaces will have the sort of guidance that they need to open up those workplaces safety, whether it's for the workers or for customers in some settings. Thank you.
Next question.
Next question comes from Colin DeMello from CTV News. Please go ahead.
Hi, just a question to the Premier and the Finance Minister about that framework that's coming up next week. How closely are you going to be watching Saskatchewan's rollout of their restarting of the economy? And could Ontario have a similar kind of 5-step plan just like Saskatchewan has?
Well, as we've been saying, Colin, the first priority is making sure we protect the health and well-being of the people of Ontario. And as you know, Saskatchewan has such a much smaller population, a large area, and a lot of farming communities as well in Saskatchewan. And I just got to tell you, I think the world of Premier Scott Moe. He's one of the champions of all the premiers. We get along very well, but we always look at other models right across the province, and actually we look at models right around the world, see what's working, what's not working, and take the best ideas off them.
Okay, and just to follow up, Premier, Quebec has asked for 1,000 more members of the Canadian Armed Forces to come in to help shore up the support that they already had. So I know Ontario has 250 now. Could there be a possibility that Ontario would need more members of the military to come in to help more beleaguered long-term care homes as we are continuing to go through this crisis?
Yeah, I had a good conversation with Premier Legault last night, and boy, they're in tough haul over in Quebec right now. We just shared advice back and forth. But right now, we've asked hospitals to get involved, public health to be involved, volunteers, retired nurses to come back, as well as the military. But we had a good conversation today with long-term care and the plan moving forward. We have a solid plan. So right now, Colin, to answer your question, we're all right. I'm so grateful for the military. These people are incredible, and I mentioned it yesterday, but when General Vance said, Premier, send me in the toughest places that you have, they're incredible. They're heroes, our men and women, part of our military. Absolutely amazing. So we welcome them with open arms. And I just want to wish Francois Legault all the best in Quebec. We think we have a tough time here. It's a lot tougher in Quebec, and he needs the resources. And again, I'm going to repeat my request to the Prime Minister that both Premier Legault and myself will ask the Prime Minister for support in long-term care. We all agree, military shouldn't be their full-time job on this end, but we need funding off the federal government. And again, I want to thank the federal government. We are so grateful for all the funding they've given us so far. They've been true partners. So thank you.
Next question.
Next question.
Okay, we are going to pull away from
Lamoureux from Radio Canada. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi, let me bring you up to date on a couple of issues that the Premier highlighted there. There are now 5 long-term care centres in Ontario where 250 Canadian soldiers will be helping in some of the hardest hit long-term care centres. The Premier also talked about a plea that he plans to make, well, he did make publicly, but will make on the phone in about an hour's time to the Prime Minister about residential relief, rent relief, which has already happened and was announced today on the commercial front by the Prime Minister. But the Premier saying that residential rent is also an issue. And finally, Ontario says that, like other provinces, next week it will announce a plan to begin easing some restrictions. That, of course, will be phased in over time. And there were no dates given, but they plan to start outlining how that might happen next week. And that, too, will be a point of conversation between the Prime Minister and Premiers who are speaking at 2 o'clock Eastern for a couple of hours, not only about reopening economies and how you coordinate that across the country, but also about essential workers. While they did reach this agreement on commercial rent today, there is still the ongoing issue of how to better help support financially essential workers in this country, and the provinces are very much interested in some additional financial aid from the federal government on that front as well.